Thanks, Maureen, and welcome to everybody. It's very, I guess, very pleasing to be together and to see so many friends on this very tough evening and particularly difficult time for all peace-loving citizens of the world. The situation in the Ukraine is awful from what I've seen on the news and heard across the Twitter waves, etc., particularly at the moment. And both the Johannesburg and the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centers have strongly Ukraine and called for peace. We've particularly been concerned about Vladimir Putin misrepresenting and misappropriating Holocaust history, claiming that the Ukraine needs to be denazified. And Putin has also falsely claimed that the Ukrainian officials are committing genocide. On that very somber note, I do want to welcome everybody and just to confirm that this exhibition, I have not seen a butterfly around here, came to South Africa at the end of 2021 and was opened by Zuzana in person, and the Czech embassy, her colleague Alice Miskova in Cape Town. The exhibition has subsequently traveled to Durban, where we've had it for 6 weeks, and it's been a very meaningful contribution to our workshops and our visitors. And it, as we speak, is being unpacked in Johannesburg at the moment. So we thought it was time, yes, for Johannesburg and the Durban centers to combine with together for this webinar, to be able to host Zuzana Pavlovská, who is the head of the Department for Education and Culture at the Jewish Museum in Prague, in the Czech Republic, who is the curator of the exhibition, as well as we appealed to Liz Elsby, who is a friend of our centers and an incredible resource, particularly on the topic of the drawings in Terezín. And as I said to her a few minutes ago when we joined in for tonight, I've never forgotten the presentation that she gave, and I think it's almost 18 months ago. I'm so pleased that all of you will have the opportunity to hear her really incredibly poignant contribution to this conversation. So we'll hear a little bit from Zuzana about the exhibition, why the exhibition, and the work that she's doing. And then Liz will unpack for us in incredible detail, with her amazing style, the significance and the poignancy of these drawings and what they mean. I want to please just to take a few minutes to thank the embassy, the Czech embassy, and particularly Alice Miskova. I also want to thank Yad Vashem, both wonderful partners to the centers in South Africa, in Cape Town, Johannesburg, and in Durban. David Deutsch in particular at the Yad Vashem has become a personal friend, and when I was wanting to reach out to Liz, I didn't have an email and contacted David, and the next thing Liz and I were on WhatsApp, and here we are. So we're very pleased and very fortunate on the southern tip of Africa to have special friends of global significance across the globe, and Yad Vashem and the embassy, as well as the Jewish Museum in Prague, are two of those special friends. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our trustees, to the survivors who've registered. It's always such a pleasure and it's such a privilege for us to be able to host you. And obviously all of you are friends. I did also feel just that we should maybe mention that all of us saw on the news a few hours ago that in fact a missile landed on the memorial at Aliya, which has been somewhat destroyed. Starts to make it real. This, you know, as much as for Zuzana, who we were talking to, she is particularly close, and for many of us, there are relatives and friends. But the situation for everybody, and our thoughts and prayers go out to those people who are in the vicinity of this incredible hardship and tragic situation. If I might just give everyone a sense of the format, I'm going to be in conversation with Zuzana for a few minutes, talking to her about her work, and then Liz is going to give a presentation, PowerPoint presentation, and we'll then have time for questions. And my friend and colleague and sister in Holocaust education, Tali Nates from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, will manage the questions. We, as you know, work together very closely, all three centers, under the umbrella of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, of which Tali manages our projects and our organization exceptionally well, and has been a source of inspiration and amazing support through these difficult times of COVID. Tali's network of colleagues and friends across the globe has meant that all of us have had access to wonderful resources. So thank you, Tali. It's always good to have the opportunity to make it clear in a public situation how much we value the work that you do, and on behalf of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. So with that, I'm going to ask you, Zuzana, if you'll tell us a little bit about what was the motivation for you to, in fact, create this exhibition, and tell us a little bit about how that dovetails with your work in Prague as we speak.
So thank you so much, Ray, and thank you so much everyone for the invitation tonight. Like you said, it's like a special, like an eve for us today. I just would like to make clear, because Maureen mentioned many times that I'm from Czechoslovakia. I actually was born in Czechoslovakia, but now I'm living in Czech Republic. It's not such a big deal because now Europe, it's more or less like a connected, but just to be sure, I'm from Prague and from Czech Republic, but it's still like a Czechoslovakia. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm glad that I can actually speak from Prague about the exhibition I never seen a butterfly around here. I think like most of you are familiar with the Jewish Museum, and I would like to say that we have actually the biggest collection of the children drawings from Terezín Stadt, because at the end of the World War II, more than 4,500 children drawings were found in the 2 suitcases in Terezín Stadt, close to the church. And actually the survivors brought the suitcases very, like it was something really incredible, because they were almost on, they were very miserable, but they decided to save these drawings because it's the only memory for the children. They mostly died in Auschwitz-Birkenau. We don't have so many survivors now, because many of them are turning to 90 plus, and actually last week we lost 3 of them, and most of them were actually children in Terezín Stadt. And the main thing was to remember all of them, and to remember the art, not just to remember the bad days, but also to remember the power of art at the days in Terezín Stadt, to thank like Frida Decker-Brandeis, the great teacher. She had the lectures and lessons with the children in Terezín Stadt, and also to use the art for today, because we can work with the art today, and I think Liz will speak a lot about it. We can use the art of the children for children, but we can also use the art of the children for the adults to learn from them. We are still working with the drawings because, like I said, it's 4,500 drawings, so you can really work with them so many days, and you can actually put them into different packages and say, okay, this was probably the lecture about the animals, this was probably the lecture of the dreams about the homeland, this was about the holidays, and we can really use them till today. And I think it's one of the things that we can really use the art for the education, and we are trying to teach about the Shoah through the art and through the eyes of the children. That's why we decided to create the exhibition, and also to kind of through the drawings introduce Terezín Stadt and the World War II through the eyes of the children. And now I think it's very complicated, because I just saw the chat and it's hard to talk when I'm seeing that like the Babi Yar was hit and Rebbetzin in Krakow was speaking. I think I thought that I will be not someone who will say that this is happening in the 21st century, because I have this feeling that the history like a circle. So we always heard from the survivors that we have to learn from what was happening during the World War II. We have to use actually the story of them. We have to use the drawings and to protect actually to protect the freedom and to protect the world. And now we are seeing what's going on very close to us. And I think that this is something that we have to still continue, and we have to use the history to educate the future. But now it's much harder to say than if the situation in the world will be different. So the main reason was really to use the drawings for the future, to use the art, to use the history of the Theresienstadt and the history of the survivors for the next generation, that they will be able to learn from it. But like I said, now it's very complicated because we are seeing that things can change in 1 week.
Really is difficult. Tell us a little bit about the majority of the people who visit the museum. I know obviously Prague, I've been a few times, and it's a magnificent city with thousands of tourists. But is your work with school children, university students?
Actually, we have both, actually. Like, I think Prague is special. The Jewish Museum in Prague is special in the things that we are using the former synagogues as a place of the museum. We have actually the Pinkas Shul, which is the memory of the Shoah, and the first floor is actually it's used as a small hall for the children drawings. It's basically visited by the tourists. Of course, the situation changed a lot during the COVID, but of course my department I'm running, it's mostly for the kids from the public schools from all around the Czech Republic, but also from abroad. They are coming to us to study actually about different types of the topics, and of course mostly they are interested also in the Shoah and Holocaust. And we are doing all kinds of seminars for the educators and for the teachers. We are working with the universities very closely. So it's some kind of like it's different. Like, of course, the museum, it used to be the most visited actually museum in Czech Republic, but people see how the situation will be now because like COVID and other things changed the situation for all of us.
Where has the traveling exhibition been to? I know it's been in South Africa, but tell us a little bit about the reach of the exhibition globally, Zuzana.
Actually, the opening of the exhibition was in Italy, in Roma. It was at the time opened by the Czech embassy in Roma. And at that time, the children played the Children Opera Brundi Bar in Italian language. Then it was in England, it was in Germany, and now it's in South Africa. And of course, like I hope it will go to several other places because it was done in English and Czech, because we wanted to share the story of the children drawings abroad, because also some of the survivors, they survived Terezín. They left later on in 1948, the former Czechoslovakia. They moved to Israel or to United States, and they published during the communist regime the book about I Never Seen a Butterfly Around Here. So the children drawings were basically famous around the world, even like it was not so famous during the communism time in the former Czechoslovakia. So that's why this is something which was always known. And we felt that it's important to continue to share the story of the children drawings because there are still few survivors among us, for example, Helga Weishošková or others, which can still actually say and tell the story when they were children and they were the prisoners of Terezín.
Thank you, Zuzana, and thank you so much for the opportunity for your exhibition to be in South Africa and for the opportunity for us to work with it and to extend the work that you have begun using the children's drawings. I'm going to ask Liz Elsby if she'd share her screen. As I mentioned, Liz is a senior member and a very important member to us of the team at Educators at Yad Vashem. She's a lecturer and a museum guide. She has escorted tours through Prague and obviously Poland, Terezin, of course, and Berlin. Some of you will know that she's also escorted tours from March of the Living. And Liz is, I don't want to say too much because I was so taken with the presentation that she gave, and I'm so really delighted and pleased, mainly with your warmth and your incredible generosity that you were just so willing to share your incredible talent and wisdom. So thank you. And we look forward to your presentation, Liz.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. And what a pleasure. And Zuzana, what a pleasure. And wow. And I'm going to talk about something a little bit different tonight because I think that we have this beautiful exhibition and hopefully people will be seeing it. I also know on the website of your museum, Zuzana, you have a wonderful site about Friedel Brandeis, really beautifully researched. And there are children's art on your museum's website, and I always advise people to take a look. So I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to go in the opposite direction. And instead of kind of repeating the work that you've done with the exhibit, I'm going to talk about another group in Terezín that has mainly been forgotten, that there were very little survivors. The group kind of vanished in the air, so to speak. And we really wouldn't even know what they look like had it not been for an incredible group of artists who felt moved enough to tell their story through artwork. And I'll just say one other thing about myself. Besides working at Yad Vashem, I'm also I'm a working artist, a working illustrator. And I have been since my university days. I studied in Betzalel, the art academy here in Israel. And for me, art is such an international and beautiful language that kind of opens doors up and allows people to understand things that words can't help us understand. Through the artwork of children, we understand, the world of childhood, how it was somehow managed to, to remain intact, even in the horrors of the ghetto. And I'm going to talk about artists who wanted us in 2022 to remember another group. And before I get there, I just want to try and open up my PowerPoint presentation. I usually have my assistant, who is my son, but he's selling books right now because we're moving house. So I just hope I can figure out how to do this. Here we go. Fabulous. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, a little bit of opposite directions about the children. I think that Zuzana has done such wonderful research with her exhibit that for my going over again would just be kind of superfluous when we have the exhibit. So I'm going to take you in a different direction. I also want to talk about art in general, which is what the exhibit, the art, children's art, all art, and why it's so important to us in 2022. And Alan Appelfeld, the famous survivor, says art constantly challenges the process by which the individual person is reduced to anonymity. And as we know, most of the children who were sent to Terezín did not survive. And I'll talk about another group where most of the members did not survive. Art gives us a second chance to see them again. For me, art is almost a type of tombstone for people who have no graves. And I'm going to talk today about, that's a general view of Terezín. So I'm not going to go into too much of the history. By the way, I use the word Terezín, which, by the way, Zuzana, if you're listening, please excuse my terrible pronunciation of Czech words. I just learned how to say Oje with someone sitting and teaching me how to say the name of the river. It's either called Theresienstadt in German or Terezín in Czech. So, because it's easier to say Terezín, I'm going to call it Terezín. And I'm going to talk about this group of artists who were sent to Terezín. Most of the artists were kind of Middle European intellectual types. They spoke Czech, they spoke German, they were familiar in Vienna and Prague and Berlin. They were kind of people who were involved in all aspects of culture and music and art and theater and journalism and poetry. Some of them were artists, some of them were doctors, some of them they were just kind of the Middle Europeans who were just involved in all of, the culture of the time, very special people. And when this terrible place is established in November 1941, among the people who are sent to establish what we call the Aufbau Commando, the first ones who were sent there by the Nazis to prepare the place, and then a second group that arrives in December, among them were groups who were artists. And the Nazis are going to use their talents. They're going to use their talents for their own means and their own ends. And what do I mean by that? How could artists serve the Nazis? Well, the Nazis really wanted the boys in Berlin, the the commanders in Berlin to see what a productive place this camp was. Therefore, they put artists to work making charts and reports, beautifully illustrated. And if you see the way that these artists are working, and I can tell you as an artist who didn't always work on the computer like I do today, and 20, 30 years ago, you work at a desk and you have your pencil and you erase things, or your hand moves, and if you knock into ink and it spills on your page, you have to start all over again. They're also working in very cramped, uncomfortable conditions, creating these charts and these reports for the Nazis. And I want to show you an example of how they're going to take advantage of their position and access to art supplies to tell the story of what's really going on in the ghetto. The Nazis don't want the outside world to know what's going on in this terrible place. The place is also going to be used, as we'll see, as kind of a shield to kind of stop the world from seeing what the real intents are as the final solution begins to unfold. And the artwork is going to be a way of presenting a fantasy. So this piece of work is by Bedřich Frita, and Zuzana, I know I'm not pronouncing his name right, but please forgive me. One of my heroes. I have a lot of my heroes are in this presentation. Bedřich Frita, before the war, was a cartoonist, an artist who lived in Prague. And here he's being forced to show building the barracks in the ghetto. And he was among the first people to arrive with the Aufbau Commando, and he becomes the head of this technical workshop. And look what the Nazis want us to think. Look how efficient this place is run. Look at these workmen and their beautiful outfits, using this fresh lumber, creating these barracks, precision, beauty. What a well-run place. Look how well the workers are treated. That's what the Nazis wanted us to see. What did he want us to see? He wanted us to see the absolute chaos, the cruelty, the filth, the dirt, the craziness of this place we call Terezín. And this drawing he makes, called Clearing the Sudeten Barracks, which is an event that happens in 1943 when the archives in Berlin got bombed. And all these important papers are in Berlin, and the Nazis decide to move them to this outpost, to this garrison town, Terezín. And even though the place was incredibly overcrowded and there's not a lot of room for people in 1943, even though the crowding was less at that point, and they decide to completely move everyone out of the overcrowded barracks, called the Sudeten barracks, to use it as an archive. Now, people are living on bunk beds, one on top of the other. The place is chaotic. There's barely any sinks. There's barely any toilets in this ghetto. There's barely any place for people to sleep. Overcrowding, fleas, lice, and all of a sudden, people have to find a new place. They have to find a new place to sleep, a new place to set up home as it is in the ghetto. And he wants the world to see that. And one of the things about this artist, Bedřich Frita, and another one of my heroes, Leo Haas, is you look at these drawings so carefully. The more you look, the more you see. And I really believe that this man who was murdered, who dies in Auschwitz in 1944, wanted us to really look carefully so that we would see what's really happening. So we could see here, people are running back and forth with lumber because they have to rebuild the bunk beds. They have to rebuild everything they had already started to create to try and make places for people to sleep. You can see how the ghetto is just, this barracks is being dismantled. People are running through the streets, carrying things on their backs. We see the infamous hearse that goes through the ghetto, carrying people's belongings and elderly people and bread. Hearse is it's a very kind of, what's the word, eerie symbol, but almost every artist shows that hearse. This is what the artists wanted us to see. And here's a picture of them. Most of these artists did not survive. Leo Haas and Norbert Toller from this whole scene here are the only ones who survived. I could give you another long talk about the artists of Terezín, but in a nutshell, The majority of the people you see here were arrested for creating horror propaganda. In other words, propaganda against the artists, against the Nazis. Karl Fleischmann was not a part of that group, neither was Petr Keen, but the others, yes. Sent to the little fortress, the concentration camp of Terezín. And only Leo Haas and Norbert Troller, who was an architect and worked for the engineering division in the ghetto, because how do you put together this barracks and make it a place where people can live? They actually had an engineering department also, and Norbert Troller was there. They're the only ones who survived. But their artwork survives to tell the story. And I want to tell you how I got interested in the story of old people. Went to Berlin a few years ago, and I was walking on Große Hamburger Straße, and I saw this sculpture, which didn't really do anything for me. And I looked around the sculpture, and I realized that this place had once been a home for the aged, a home for the elderly people of Berlin. And there really wasn't much to mark that they had ever been there, that this had been a place that was established in the 1800s for a very warm community that took care of its old people, that had all of the community things that we have in all Jewish communities in the world. Also the House of the Aged, where they live with dignity and respect. And there was nothing there except for this sculpture. And here's just a little bit about the place. Didn't really say anything to me. It didn't tell me who these people were. And I got more and more interested in it. This is what this old age home looked like before it was bombed and destroyed. And these are some of the elderly people. Now, these elderly people were not German Jews. They were Czech Jews who were sent off, most of them to Terezín. But looking through Yad Vashem records and looking through transit lists and trying to find something more about many of these people, most of these people, there's nothing. They lived a whole life. They contributed to society. They, had children. Some of them were in the profession. Some of them were artists. Some were musicians. Some of them were scientists. Some of them were, and not a lot remains. Very few survived. And I wondered why. And how come we don't talk about them? So nice to talk about the children's opera, which was amazing, and the culture, which was amazing in Terezín. And all those things are incredible that Jews still did that. But this particular group of people is not so exciting to talk about. And that really made me very sad. And I want to tell you, through the eyes of one of these people, a guy called Philip Mainz, who was a Jew from Berlin, who was sent to Terezín in 1942 when the great deportation of the German elderly Jewish people were sent to Berlin, and from Berlin to Terezín. And he organizes all kinds of cultural events in the ghetto. He's a man in his 60s, and he manages to kind of pick people up through culture. We'll talk about him in a minute. And he writes this. He was actually alone with his wife, like many of the German Jews. And this is going to be a very sad part of the story. In Terezín, most of the leadership of the ghetto were Czech Jews. And even though many spoke German, the language of the ghetto was mainly Czech. Also, many Czech Jews had some kind of contact outside, be it a family member who hadn't been sent yet, be it friends. There's amazing stories of a young man who was part of the Jewish youth movement who wasn't sent to the ghetto until 1943 or 44, who manages to send packages to his friends in the ghetto. But most German Jews didn't have that. These elderly people, like Philip Mainz, all of his children had gotten out of Berlin, had gotten out of Germany. Why didn't they take the old people with them? One of the reasons was Philip Mainz's mother was still in the old age home, and he would not leave Germany without his mother. Also, it's very difficult for German Jews to leave. It's hard for them to get out. So most of them have no outside support. And most German Jews only spoke German. There were a few who spoke Yiddish, very few. They're the ones who came from Poland in the beginning of the 20th century. But he's arrested. He's put to work before. He has to work very, very hard in Berlin. He's arrested. He's sent to the old age home, which at this point had been changed into like a concentration camp. And in that concentration camp, this old age home, These old people have to sign a form to give away everything they own for a new place in the spa town of Terezín. That's how this place is sold to them, the spa town. I just want to show you, and this is one of those house purchasing documents that they had to give away everything. And in exchange, they were going to be getting a nice apartment in the spa town. They were going to be getting 3 square meals a day, hot meals in the spa town, medical care, laundry, everything that people would need to set up a new life. Like it or not, you know, this is what the future lay for them. And people were happy that at least their assets, at least something would be going to the spa town. If they had to leave Berlin, if they had to leave their country, at least it would be to a place where they were assured that they would have good living conditions. All a big lie. He is taken, after he signs this, like so many Jews from Berlin, he's forced to stay in the old age home, which I said at this point is just a detention camp where people are gathered together. The furniture is removed. There's no hot meals. There's barely any water. There's no place to sit down. The people are living in terrible conditions. These are people in their 70s, people in their 80s. And when they get enough together, they're forced to go to one of 3 train stations in Berlin, actually 4. Some of these poor souls on the first transports in June 1942, are forced to walk to the Grunewald station, which is almost 8 kilometers away from Mitte, where the old age home was. 8-kilometer walk through the city. Philip Manus is taken to the train station, the Anhalter station, which was one of the big train stations in Berlin. And he writes these very sad words. He says, "Oh, great hall, who has seen me 1,000 times and more. Now you cast an old customer out into the unknown as a consignment, a slave, expelled from the society in which we had allowed to live, protected by law, undisturbed." And he's taken to the train station. And this is something else that piqued my interest, because I've walked in front of this train station quite a few times. I've even stayed at a hotel nearby. The train station was bombed during World War II and never reconstructed. So you just see the ruins there. But it's very hard to feel any sympathy, because if you really go up and look, which most people don't do, there's a sign. And that sign informs you, if you really want to take a look, that from the station, I think more than 9,500 people were sent to Terezín, the majority of them elderly people. And that was the last glimpse of their country they had lived in for their whole lives, that they had contributed to, that they loved, you know, that they were German. That was their identity. They were patriots. They loved their nation. And now they're being expelled under this new government to this spa town in the east. And this is where I want to show you where the artists come in. The artists who were drawing the drawings for the Nazis, but creating artwork at night. And not all of them worked together. Not all of them worked in the technical workshop. One of the wonderful artists we'll talk about was a doctor called Fleischmann, who also draws on the side, hundreds of drawings. Another one of these wonderful artists works in the urine tract infection ward, where he's drawing the people he sees. People were compelled to draw the plight of the elderly people. I think those, you know, there's times in your life when you need the most help and the most care. Children, when we see the children's drawings that you'll see in the exhibit, they're heartrending. Children you want to protect and nurture and give a beautiful life. And the elderly. In the last years of their lives, you want to give the elderly people comfort and stability and love. And these two very opposite ends of the spectrum are the most vulnerable population. Can everyone still hear me? I just want to make sure, because the dog just came in and moved my computer around a little bit.
Yes.
Fabulous. Yes. The dog and the cats. Okay. So the people arrive after a train journey, which from Berlin, they were usually put in a second-class train, dumped in the back of the train. Oh, there's the cat. And I just want you to imagine that people are getting on the train, going different places in Germany, getting on the train, not looking and not really caring that the last carriage is being filled with elderly people. Those who can walk are walking into the second-class train carriage. Those who can't are dumped in there. They arrive to the area of Theresienstadt, of Terezín, but there's no train line into the ghetto until the following year. So they have to walk, those who are able, from the town of Bohusovice nad Odrze into the ghetto. And those who are too weak and too old are taken in by truck. And Leo Haas, again, one of the only artists who survives, is among the artists who are angry and incensed by this. How can we treat these people this way? These are innocent people. They've done nothing wrong. Their only thing they did wrong was being born Jewish. How can we treat them this way? And he makes this drawing to show us how the old people made that trip from the train station of Bohusovice nad Odrze into the camp. Now, this is a print that he does later on in the 1960s, but he does them from exact drawings that he created in the camp in 1942 and 1943. And this one we see the old people going into the ghetto. Let's look at it carefully because it says so much. And he's really one of those artists who wants you to look at the details. He doesn't want you to pass over this. He wants you to look at the details. So we see the old people are exposed. They're riding in the back of a truck. We see that half of them look like they're about to go flying off. If this truck goes over a bump, half the people are going to go flying off. We see that many of these poor people are no longer alive. To the Nazis, every single body needs to be counted, dead or alive. So you have the extra horror of these poor people riding with the corpses of their fellow Jews. And there's something else that's very disturbing here. First of all, notice that the artist doesn't have any of these figures making eye contact with us. When I make a drawing, it's often important for me to have my figures or my characters look at you. There's a dialogue that you have with a face, with a person in a picture. Here, none of them are looking at us, except for what appears to be a corpse. And his dead eyes are kind of grab our eyes. I always think, what are they saying to us? What is our role in all of this as witnesses? Another thing that we see with these poor old people is that the most prominent thing on them are the labels. Their names no longer matter. What they did in their lives no longer matter. Now they are just, inanimate objects that need to be dumped into the ghetto. Unless we have any doubts who the people responsible are, he leaves this on the bottom of the truck so that we'll know. SS. We know who's doing this. We know what this human cargo is. This is another drawing by Leo Haas. This is the people who are able to walk. And I know that often I go to Terezín in the winter. It's very, very cold, and when you go out in the countryside, and we see that long, dreadful walk from the train station all the way into Terezín. I actually showed you that little current map, and it literally takes an hour to walk. So these poor elderly folks are walking over an hour. But there's something here that is really also very exciting and often we talk about this as being the art of resistance, the art against death. And these artists have a little secret symbol here for us. And the secret symbol is a V, like V for victory. And here you can see it on the wall here, and you'll see it in a lot of the other artwork, this V for victory. And here they are entering the ghetto. And Philip Manis says this: with fearful hearts, we sat on the few narrow benches, waiting to see where our exhausted, broken bodies could finally come to rest. They come into the place, and they're taken to a place called the Sluice. And there they have to wait, sometimes 2 or 3 days, while they are robbed of everything they own. And this drawing by the wonderful artist Ferdinand Blach, who also was murdered in Auschwitz. No, I think Ferdinand Blach dies in the little fortress. Arrival in Terezín. Look at this drawing. First of all, our eyes can't move away from this elderly woman. She doesn't look healthy. Her colors are greenish. Her expression is kind of, she's given up. She's sitting among her packages, her little things that are going to be stolen from her. We see that there's a bowl on the floor. We know she must be hungry and thirsty. The bowl isn't filled. It's a picture that makes me feel that the artist must have been so angry when he created this. How dare they? How dare they do these to these people? And another thing we see is that what was important for the artist to show us here. We see her face, which is very kind of really like almost dead. She's sitting there, she's looking at us, she's angry, she's given up. And we see what defines her now in this new camp, which is the yellow star and the numbers. Now she's just a number. The living conditions for the elderly people were appalling. And we have to understand that in the ghetto, there was limited resources. And in 1942, especially in the summer, is the period that will become the most crowded period in the time of this camp. The Jewish Council has to make some very difficult decisions that we can't judge. Who gets the better food? If you only have a certain amount of food, that's all you get. And that food has to be distributed to everyone in the ghetto. Who gets the better food? What do you do with children? Children are the hope of the Jewish people. Children need to have better conditions. If they're sent to this terrible ghetto, they need to have conditions where they can thrive as much as possible. They have to have better food. They have to have, if possible, better places to sleep. Secret education, which Gander Redlich comes in already in the first commandos that come, and he is this young guy in his 20s, and he's already in charge of educating these young kids from all walks of life, all different levels of education, of educating them. And what do you do with old people? Old people can't work. Old people are like kind of not the people who can be productive. Maybe a 65-year-old person can work. What about the 85-year-old grandma from Berlin who's all by herself, who only speaks German, who may have some problems already with her memory? What do you do with them? And Gander Redlich writes this in his diary, this young man who's in charge of the education. A transport from Berlin arrived. Now they have brought these elderly women to an attic in one house. The women did not want to lie on a stone floor in the dust of a dirty attic. In Berlin, they were told they were coming to a sanatorium. This is what the artist, Frita, wants us to see. This picture is called Before the Transport. And take a look at the conditions here. This is where old people are sleeping. Now, the artist is a cartoonist. He doesn't care that all the people are the same size. He wants to show an expression. He wants us to be moved by their plight, by their faces, by their wrinkles. He doesn't care that everyone's the same size, and neither should we. But when we look at this, and also I think when we show this to young people, to students, I could tell students, Terezín was a terrible place. People slept in attics without beds. But when you see this, you begin to understand, oh my God, look at these people, these old people sleeping on the floor, no mattresses. How difficult is it to get up off the floor just to move around? Together with these poor elderly people, we have blind people. This man is blind. He has the symbol of blind people, the 3 balls. We have people who are losing their minds, or people who may have some kind of mental illness, which may be this woman here who is sitting here kind of undressing in a very strange way. We have couples lying on the floor. We have a man who appears to be dying. We have people with their suitcases. How normal is it to sleep with a suitcase? Usually when we go somewhere, the first thing we do is unpack, even if it's a hotel room, and we put our suitcase under the bed. We don't want to see it all the time. Here, there's this constant reminder that they're going somewhere. This is fleeting. And again, it doesn't matter what this old couple did in their lives. It doesn't matter that they had 3 children and he may have been a prominent rabbi. It doesn't matter that this one might have been a famous artist. Now all that matters is that they are numbers. It's as if their past is erased. And I often think each one of these people must have a story, must have something about their lives. But Bajik Frita wants us to know here in Terezín, in this attic, they're nothing. They're just cargo waiting to be shipped off. And again, you could feel, I feel so much sorrow and anger in this artist. I know from when I draw, and I'm angry, or listening to music that makes me excited. We can feel that here, how he drew the wrinkles again and again and again in this woman's sorrowful face. And he wants to show us, you know, the people lying there in despair. And there's little clues here too. And I love finding the clues that Leo Haas and Bedřich Frita put in their work. Because here we have a quote from Zdeněk Lederer, who survives. And he writes in the 1950s all about this camp. And he writes this, he writes, when Seidel, the camp commander, was informed about the high mortality in the ghetto in September 1942, he said, "The clock ticks well," thus epitomizing the German aims in a single sentence. In other words, the clock is ticking, the terrible conditions are doing their work. These people are dying from the conditions. And look at this woman holding a clock. There's no reason she should be holding a clock, but he wants us to be reminded, I think, of that sentence also. For these people, it's only a matter of time, tick, 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 until the time runs out. And here is another picture by Bedřich Frita of the terrible conditions in the attic, boiling hot in the summer, freezing cold in the winter, filled with lice and fleas. And we'll talk about the toilets in a minute. And again, the conditions are appalling for almost everyone in the ghetto, but for the elderly people, those who can't work, those who can't contribute, the terrible decision has to be made. Where do you put people who work? Where do you put people who work 16 hours a day? We can't have children sleeping in such horrible conditions. Children are our future. And this is the out of necessity. This is what the Nazis did to them, that they had to do this to these elderly people. Another drawing by Leo Haas. Norbert Troller, who I told you also worked in the engineering division, also an architect, becomes a very architect and famous architect in the States after the war, shows us that even the buildings themselves in Terezín become a tool of oppression, because the food is not served in the attics to the elderly people. There are spots downstairs where people can eat. There's no big dining rooms with tables. Also, there are no toilets in the attics for these people to go to the bathroom in. If you are a young child, it's difficult enough having to go up and down steps to eat and go to the bathroom. But for the elderly people, it becomes a daily torment that some of them cannot do. And he writes in this picture, 42 steps up one flight, and there are 2 flights. That's 84 steps for people to go up and down to get their meals and to go to the toilets. And this menacing drawing, which shows this almost this like cave, it's almost like a living being. And this poor elderly person is just beginning that long journey up the stairs back to the attic. He wants us to see, and I think he felt as an architect also. Architects create structures that are supposed to serve humanity. Here they don't serve humanity, the opposite, they torture. Another artist draws the same thing. And I could do a whole talk about how different artists bore witness to the same events. Even Helga Vaisova, who Zuzana mentioned, there's artwork that she created that other artists also drew the same things. And I know one of the most shocking for me is when they had the Sperre in the Bohusovice Hollow, when everyone in the ghetto was forced to stand outside in November 1943 in freezing cold conditions all day. And more than 300 people died that day. And anyone who was in the camp at the time never forgot that terrible counting of all of the people in the ghetto. And so many artists draw that same thing. Here we have another artist, Ernst Morgenstern, who is not part of this artistic circle working in the technical division, but he also draws in the camp things that upset him and move him. And we see that same view of those elderly people climbing up those interminable steps, going up and down to eat, up and down to go to the bathroom. It gets to a point where many people just lie in their own filth. They simply cannot go up and down the stairs, and some of them don't eat and die really of starvation because they can't make it up and down the steps. There are an incredible group of people who are helping the elderly, are trying to work with the elderly, but it's so overwhelming. It's such an overwhelmingly terrible place. Overcrowding. the year 1942, the summer of 1942, when the deportations begin from Berlin and from Germany of old people, is the time of the biggest overcrowding in the history of Terezín. And I just want to show you what it was like at the time. And this is from one of those charts created by another wonderful artist who was a hero of mine also, Terezín, who was murdered at the age of 25 in Auschwitz. And this is one of the reports he had to create for the SS. And this shows the improvement of the overcrowding in the ghetto. So this is the first part, 1942. The second part, 1943, shows us how it's already not so crowded. But I want to show you the situation, the population of the ghetto in 1942. And we have here children up until the age of 15. There are 2,761 kids in the ghetto in October 42. There are 17,715 people who are between the ages of 16 and 55. And those over the age of 55 years in 1942, 32,788 people. So the elderly people are more than half the people in the ghetto. And there's just no place to put everybody in the summer of 1942. This is another drawing by Terezín showing us the overcrowding, how incredibly cruel it was. There was no place to put people. People are sleeping in basements. People are sleeping in shops. People are sleeping in what were horse stalls. And also, as I said, shops and stores that had other purposes before the war are now being used to house human beings. And the irony of the butcher shop being used to house elderly people is something that at least 3 of the artists draw also. How ironic, how awful. So you can see here the meat shop. The meat in the shop now is no longer meat that's useful. It's not meat you can consume. It's not something desirable. Now it's just elderly people. And that's not lost on the artists either. And here we have another drawing by Leo Haas showing sleeping quarters, again in the butcher shop. Just the term that butcher shop would be used is very, very ironic. But this butcher shop is no longer something useful or desirable. It's not selling meat. It's not selling something that can sustain life. It's being used to house old people. And in that hot, terrible summer of 1942, when people are arriving, transport after transport after transport, we can see how they're being housed here. The windows are broken because it's boiling hot. We see who else is here. First of all, there's some very ironic things here, and Zuzana can correct my Czech, but Vishek masa, excuse my Czech, means something like cut meat or sliced meat, something that has to do with meat. There's a pig on the picture. Some of these elderly people were traditional Jews who kept kosher. That pig there is also very ironic. Again, Leo Haas always wants us to know who's doing this. We see here a sign with a swastika on it. We see people sleeping in the shop. Their clothes are hanging here. They're on the floor. There's this kind of touching image here, which looks like a woman singing. People are sitting in the windows. The heat is coming in. Let's look at it a little bit closer and see what else we can see. There's the close-up of the meat sign. And then we have this picture. Friends, also something that artists like to do in art is to keep you kind of in suspense. A piece of artwork can make you think, what's going to happen next? And you feel uncomfortable when you see it. And there's so many elements here that make us feel uncomfortable. The jagged glass. Is someone going to cut themselves on the glass? The blind man walking down the street. Is that cane going to go into this grid over here, or is he going to fall on his face? We see a starving child in front of this glass. And if you look closely here, you can see reflected in the glass is what looks like a skull, looks like a skeleton. What is the fate of that child going to be? He's probably going to die. And makes us very uneasy, very uncomfortable. That's exactly what the artist wanted us to do. Here we have people burying a body, but because it's so hot out and because it's so oppressive and these people are probably working like 16 hours a day, they had to stop and take a little break right in front of the place where there are other elderly people who will soon be joining this corpse. Makes us very, very uncomfortable. And here's another one of the other artists, Bedřich Frita, showing us the same thing. Jews in the shop, in the window, broken windows, the heat, the misery. And we have the V again. Did everyone notice the V? And the V, it's very interesting that this man seems to be kind of like hung up on the V. We don't quite understand. Is it part of the glass, but the glass is broken? What is the V doing here? But we know that V is also a sign of resistance. So the artist wanted us to know in 2022, look how they house these poor people. Look at the conditions. Look at how I'm sure it wasn't lost on the SS, ha ha ha. The conditions are so awful. They're in a meat, you know, in a butcher shop. The irony of it all. And then of course there's the terrible hunger, which affected everyone in the ghetto, children and adults alike, but perhaps adults, the elderly, the worst, for a few reasons. First of all, again, the decision to give the better food to young people, which is, you know, again, young people need milk, young people need sustenance, they need food that can help their little bodies, with the tiny amount of food that's available in the ghetto anyway. People who are working 16 hours a day need to have calories so they can work. Who's going to get the worst food? And the answer will have to be the elderly people. Remember, a lot of these elderly people are from Berlin. A lot of them do not have packages arriving, which may be a month, every month, 2 months, jam arrives or something arrives from Prague for some of the inmates who are Czech Jews. And many of these old people are starved to death. And the soup that they are given, that no one would even eat because it was so awful, was soup it was synthetic lentil soup. It wasn't even a real lentil soup. And so many people write about memoirs, or when they talk about their time in Terezín, the elderly people begging for the soup, which was just disgusting and inedible. And Ferdinand Blach draws that. And I just want to show you this picture because for me it's also always very touching. You know, when you get to be a certain age, there's little pleasures in life that just, you know, that just make it worth living. You want to sit at a clean table. You want a tablecloth. You want to have hot food. You want to get up from the table and feel that your stomach has been filled. None of that happens with these elderly people in the ghetto. Remember, they have to go down those 94 steps or 48 steps downstairs. Wait, as Denik Lederer said, with thousands of other people to be served a meal. And look at them standing there. This is what you see in a gulag. This is what you see with prisoners, political prisoners, or people who have committed a crime. Not these poor inmates of Terezín, and especially not these poor elderly people. And they're standing there holding their bowls, supplicating, please feed us. And this barrel and this bowl on the ground, you know, they're going to have to eat wherever they could sit down, almost have a presence, as if they're standing there and mocking them. There's only a little bit here and there's only a little bit there, and each one is going to get just a tiny bit, and they're going to go to bed hungry. They're not going to be filled up. They're going to have to eat in the cold ground. It's against everything that we want for elderly people. And Ferdinand Blach, I feel his anger here. Why is this happening? Look, world, look what's happening here. You can see that here. One more thing, and I think I don't know how much longer I could talk for. 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
10 minutes would be great. Thank you.
10 minutes, okay. I just want to show you Karl Fleischmann draws this, another thing that's so horrible that we don't even think about. And there were some young people who were involved in finding old people who lost their way and got disoriented and wandered around the ghetto, some of them until they fell down and broke something, or just till they gave up and just sat there and sometimes froze. And Karl Fleischmann, this amazing doctor who was in charge of the medical wing, the medical unit, and also prolific artist in the ghetto, really incredible man, draws this drawing of this elderly man who I think has lost his way, just wandering aimlessly around the ghetto, can't remember how to get back to his barracks. Look out, the clothes don't fit him anymore. look how he's still trying to retain his dignity. He has his hat on, he's wearing his coat, he's blowing his nose and his handkerchief. He's not, you know, lifting his nostrils up and blowing it on the street. He's trying to have some semblance of dignity. And why do I think he's wandering around with the food, trying to find a place to eat and got lost? Because we could see here the beginnings in the sketch of like what looks like maybe his bowl that he put down. This is an everyday occurrence in the ghetto, elderly people just wandering around aimlessly, lost. It's not something we think about. And they actually created groups of people who would go and help old folks find their way back home. Many young people were involved in that. There was actually some of the youth leaders, some of the madrichim would tell the young people, you know, if you see an old person, think about your own grandmother and then stand up, show them that young people are there for them, show them they're not alone, lead them, show them with your youthful smile that you're there for them. Incredibly poignant picture. I'm going to, in the interest of time, go to this artist who, that's really one of my heroes. And they're all my heroes. And from Zuzana, you could still see where his studio was. It's right on the corner. It's right at the beginning of Wenceslas Square, my American pronunciation. And I forgot the name of the street that leads to the Misty Republiki, that long street. It was in the building on the corner. You know what I'm talking about? Where the studio was?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
it's in that building. I think there's a McDonald's right nearby today. There's like a little mall you can cut through, and it's on the 3rd floor. Anyway, Moritz Müller was a very had a studio. He was an artist. He was also involved in this whole artistic circle of Prague, you know, in between the war, which must have been a truly wonderful place. You know, this artistic fervor and just very cultured people. When he's sent to the ghetto, he does something very unusual. He chooses the worst place to work in the ghetto. What could possibly be the worst place in the ghetto? Well, there was hospitals in the ghetto, and there was, you know, as good as they could have medical service in the ghetto. They had operations in the ghetto. As more and more people arrived, they got more and more supplies. At the beginning, it was terrible. But the people who had conditions that could not be treated were elderly men with prostate cancer, elderly men who had urine tract infections. And there's not much you can do for them. It's a terrible affliction. And for most of these men, they were just put into this ward, which stank of urine, which was filthy, to die. There wasn't, you know, you couldn't have an operation. There's nothing really to be done for them. And Moritz Müller chose to work there with these old people. And he sat with them, held their hands, talked with them, and drew more than 400 drawings of portraits of them, showing them as human beings, showing them as people, each one with their own face, each one with their own individuality. It's so incredibly touching. And we have, I think, 35 of them in Yad Vashem. And some of them, he actually signed the drawings, who they were, you know, where they were from. Most of these people did not survive. Most of these people don't even know who they were. But when you see them, there's such a feeling of dignity, that they were human beings with a personality. And I'm very grateful to him for that. In his last few months in the ghetto, he was so overwhelmed by everything that he simply could not draw anymore. He stopped drawing. He was taken to Auschwitz and murdered in 1944. He was only in the ghetto for a very brief time. But again, to choose to work in that terrible place with these people who are going to die, with the smells and to try and find their humanity and give it back to them through art, for me, it makes him into a real hero. And I'm going to end, the deportation, I'm going to end with this. And I think I have to thank Zuzana, because I think I got these both. They're from the collection of the Prague Jewish Museum, who have a wonderful, wonderful archive. If anyone wants to look, they have a beautiful art archive. Again, also a wonderful site about Friedeldicke Brandeis and children's art. But I'm going to end with this portrait by Karl Fleischmann, the doctor, amazing doctor. Because when you draw a portrait of someone and they sit in front of you and you sit in front of them and you look into their eyes and they look into your eyes, it's really a very, very intimate moment. And as you use as your pencil moves across their face, it's as if they're caressing. You're caressing their face. You're getting their eyes. You're getting their facial expressions. You're capturing it. And this woman that he drew, I feel she's so alive. And the way he drew her, there's so much. I'm so empathetic towards this woman. We could look right into her eyes. She's staring directly at us. She's a little disheveled. And as we know, people who lived 70, 80, 90 years ago, the hair was perfect and the clothing was perfect and everything when in right times would have been ironed and beautiful. And here she's disheveled, but she's got so much humanity. And what is she saying to the artist? And what is he thinking when he draws her? And what was his reason for sitting down with this woman and drawing her and making sure she's not forgotten? For me, I could stare at this for a long time, and I feel her presence so much. And I think that's what these artists do for us. Also, the beautiful artwork created by the children, which you'll see in the exhibit, we feel them. We feel their presence in the arts. We know their little hands touched it. We can feel what they were thinking. Here also, I feel her presence too. And remember, this didn't happen in 1 minute. This wasn't a photograph. This took a long time and a lot of consideration and a lot of feeling went into this. And when we see the artwork from the children, from these elderly people, and from those artists who themselves did not survive, again, I feel they're a type of tombstone. We don't have graves for these people. We don't know what this woman's name was. We don't know what their fate was. We know most of the children who were murdered in Auschwitz have no grave. But their artwork is like a tombstone. So we remember them and we never forget them. So that's it. Thank you, everybody. By the way, if you go to Prague and you go to the new cemetery, there is a very touching memorial on the wall for people who have no graves. Suzanne, I forgot the name of the neighborhood, but I remember the tram you take there. And this is some of these wonderful artists. So I want to thank everybody, and I'll stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Tally. If you could take us through any questions and comments, and thanks.
Absolutely. And thank you to Zuzana, and thank you to Liz for bringing really those two groups that were targeted more and less survived, the young and the elderly, to life through the exhibition that is now at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and through the art. And maybe if we can have Zuzana and Liz with us just for a few minutes, and there are some comments and questions, and specifically for teachers, Liz and Zuzana.
Yes.
The art, I mean, and Michael Kaplan is one of our teachers, and he's saying that in a way, maybe the art is more powerful than photographs. And how do you, as an educator, and both of you are educators, incorporate the art from Theresienstadt in teaching? What would you say? And maybe, Zuzana, let's start with you, the art of the children. Sorry. All right. So maybe, Zuzana, if you can start and unpack for us a little bit the young, I mean, how do you use art from the children, but maybe also the teachers, especially, the teachers that taught art and were involved in Vedem and Kamerad and so on. And then, Liz, I will come to you about the elderly.
Thank you, Liz. It was really wonderful. But I must say that we are using the art of the real artists from Terezín also. Like, it's just like a pity because it's hard to talk about the children drawings and everything if we are not seeing them. But I hope you saw them before when I was in Cape Town. So, like I said before, like I think the art, and I think Michael Kaplan wrote it that the art is sometimes much more powerful than the pictures. So I think we mostly don't know the faces of the children. We know the faces of the artists. They were deported to Terezín, like Les mentioned some of them. We have like pictures from them. But when we are using the art of the kids, like we can just think about the children, because like we know some of them, we got some pictures, some photographs, so we can imagine the kids, and we can a little bit think how they felt when they did it. We have a few survivors. I think the most important for us, it's today Helga Weiss-Hošková, because she became the real artist after the World War II also. And she always said that if she learned something from Terezín, she actually learned so many things which influenced her future life, and she became really the real artist. And it was not so easy for her to study under the communist regime and to talk about the Shoah and about the things she went through. And we can actually see her art from Terezín, and we can see her art after. And she never left actually what she survived. We can always see what she and her mom went through, because her real art, like an adult art, it's really influenced by that. So this is one of the examples that we can actually use when we are teaching, because we can really not compare, but to see how someone who was 12, who was deported to Terezín and to other places and survived, lived after. Because I have to say that, like, for us, when we are teaching, it's very important today, not just to talk about what was happening during World War II, but how was the return and what was after. Because I used to live in the place which was under the communist regime, and was not so welcome to talk again about the Jews and about the time when the World War II actually was happening in my country. So that's why we can actually see so many things which can be kind of like combined. So, and the other thing is, which changed a lot in the education, I don't think so that it's just in Czech Republic, but also in other places, many teachers are asking to teach this topic for the children around the age of 10 plus, which wasn't common 20 years ago. We used to teach the children around the age of 14. So now we can actually think about the changes in the education of Shoah. And of course, the art is the most, I think, impressive example, because if you are using the art, and you are using the art of the children, and you are using the art of the artist, you are not saying, you actually less show us now, and we can actually see some of the frightening things even from the children drawings. If some child was about the age of 10, you can still feel how the children were feeling at the time, because we just saw the elder people waiting to get the food. But we have so many examples of the children drawings, from the children drawings, that the kids were drawing the children waiting in the line for the food. So it's just like the combination. You can just see someone who was 10 years old draw the same, and someone who was like a Mr. Fleischmann or Fritta or Bloch or Haas or others, we just heard about them, and they did the same. So it's something that you can just see that they saw it from both perspectives. They saw it from the perspective of the children drawings, but they saw the same from the perspective of the adults. The same, like you mentioned, the magazines which were published in Terezín, even the adults didn't know what the children knew about Terezínstadt. One example, it's like the drawing of the crematorium. How we can imagine that the children knew about the crematorium, how come, but we can see the crematorium step by step. We can see how it works. And it was someone who was 12 years old. So I think it was great to see it from the perspective to the adults, but and I know that Liz, she knows all the children drawings and everything by heart, but it's interesting for me to put them together, because you can see, like, if I will stay here and my son will be next to me, and I will draw what I'm seeing just in front of my eyes, and he will do the same, and then we can combine. And this is like what we can do also for like and use the art like that, because this is how we are working with them. Because of course it's interesting and amazing to show the art of Fleischmann, Fritta, and others. We can see Fritta and the book for his son, actually Tomáš, what he did for him, and other things. But for me, it's amazing to see and to try to see what the children saw, what the adults saw, and they just have the same thing in front of their eyes, and they did it from different perspective. But at the end, it's the same drawing, just did by different people.
And it's so important what you're saying, because drawing as primary sources. I mean, students need to know how to analyze primary sources. And they look at documents, they look at photographs, but what will be really powerful is to look at those drawings and to look at them from the eyes of the children and from the eyes of those adults, and see the same scenes, if it is the scenes around the food, or the scenes around deportations, or the scenes around the crematorium, as you said. So
just another thing which if I can add, it's that, like, for example, if I'm using the art of Helga Weiss-Hošková, of course we know that there were like all kind of some people visited Terezín, they took the pictures, and we have some photographs. But for example, Helga is really like a real example of someone who made actually for us something like an album, because we can go step by step and we can see the daily life in Terezín. We can see how the barracks looked like at the time. We can see how was actually this dormitory, that dormitory. So she really created for us kind of like a tour through Terezín during that time, which is really unbelievable, because like we don't have it's just this collection by Helga that you can really see it from that time she arrived and she was 12 years old till the time she left. We can really see day by day, because it's unbelievable. And it could be also used, and it used, of course, like when we are teaching about the Terezín and other places and the life there, as an album. Really, we can really, it's served like that, and it's unbelievable, because you will not have this album that someone will take the pictures day by day, step by step, but she did it for us. And this is also something which is really unique.
Absolutely. And I'll invite Liz just now to join us to the spotlight and reflect on that. But because we don't have so many photographs from Theresienstadt, we have some propaganda photographs, of course, taken by the Nazis. What you are suggesting to us, Zuzana, is so important, because those drawings, as Michael, you said, are giving us really those step-by-step image of Theresienstadt that the Nazis wanted to portray as this, paradise that we know, of course, is the big lie, the fake news of the 1940s. But the drawings are telling us the reality and the real story. Liz, please come and reflect on that same question.
Well, what I think is so wonderful what Zuzana said, and what I have in some of my other presentations is, especially with Helga, there were so many events that happened in Terezín that artists remember. For example, the arrival of children from Bialystok. And we have at least, I think, 9 artists, including Helga, who draw the scene that was not supposed to be seen. You were supposed to be behind you, and they bore witness, and they felt compelled to bear witness. The Sperre and the Bohusovich, when they counted everybody. Wonderful things. And I think Zuzana mentioned something that, that children can also see hope. Helga draws what some other artists drew too, secret prayers, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when Jews would gather in the attics and secretly pray together. What it is also historically, and I'll talk about educationally in a minute, is, historians try and find when enough people report on an event, from different sources, and they come together, as primary sources are so amazing and so powerful that all these artists, not all of them in the technical division, children, individuals, doctors, all saw and recorded and were moved by the same things. Now with students, not all students are verbal. Not all students can express themselves in words. I think art is draws people in so much, and there's so much you can talk about, even like one drawing. I know there's a wonderful children's drawing of a dragon, and a princess and a dragon. When you show that to students, they take off. What were they feeling? Why are they drawing? What is that princess? Why is the dragon? Were they scared? Were they this and that? When you see pictures of kids remembering Passover at home, when you see drawings of kids, the train coming in and how scary that train was, things that adults also remembered and also drew. It's something incredibly human that children can relate to. And we're living in very visual times. I mean, everything that's happening right now in Ukraine, you open up the phone and you're seeing it. people today, especially young people, need to see visual things. They're very visual. So you can read them. And I like when I show artwork, I like to have passages, you know, from diaries or from Vedim or from to kind of, you know, to elevate the pictures even more. But I think it is that children understand so much more when they see something visual. And the fact that art, when I go to the Terezín Museum or Yad Vashem Art Museum and I'm standing in front of a work that I know someone's hand touched and someone was close to and someone thought about it, it just makes it so real. And what's wonderful also for informal education, especially with the children's drawings, it really gives children a way of seeing an exhibit and then expressing themselves. You know, I've just learned about this place. I'm reading a poem that was written by a 9-year-old 80 years ago. Maybe I can make a piece of art about it. It's moving me too. And I can respond to it. I can respond to it through art. I can respond to it through poetry, something. So I think artwork is the gift, and it also gives someone seeing it wings to create their own artwork. And one other thing, which I think Zuzana said that's so important, that's very important to us as educators at Yad Vashem, we never want to show children bodies. We never want to show them Bergen-Belsen. We don't want to terrify them. We don't want to discuss them. And you can choose artwork that can tell the story without pushing them away, safely in and safely out. So for all those reasons, I think artwork is so important.
Can I just add something, Liz? You mentioned the drawing, which is like the dragon and the puppet theater. I think from my perspective of view, it's also for us and for the kids I'm teaching very familiar, because like in Europe, it's really and it used to be very popular, the puppet theater. So when they draw this, it was also to remember how was the life before. So I think for me, it's also important that I can use the art just to talk about the time before, because it's something that they can be actually familiar with it. For some countries, it's not so popular, but for us, it was really something common, like a puppet theater. I grew up with puppet theater. I can actually see some of there's written, for example, school, škola. I can imagine the same school. So I think it's also a little bit different when I'm using the art, and I'm using the art of the children, they grew up in the same country. I can actually talk a little bit more about the background, because if I will teach in Israel or if I taught in Cape Town and I had the lectures, it's a little bit different, because these are the same children also, they have the same place and whatever, but it's different. They are not familiar with this. So I think this is also unique for us, that we can really see it. We can see that you said that like some Jews were religious, some were more assimilated. So you can see the Hanukkah menorah next to the Christmas tree, and it's not something which will be wrong at the time, like, so it's something that you can really use the details from it, and you can actually much more be closer to the kids, and you don't have to show the terrifying pictures like you mentioned, Bergen-Belsen, etc., because the kids will be much more touched by something which is close to them, because they knew and they know this from their home. And that's why it's very important that you can use the actually the drawings also like that.
That's so true. And also I think it's, as educators, we want children to know there was a world before. They went to the school, and Peter Gintz, is a picture of him stealing ice cream from his sister, and his sister's angry at him, and they were kids. And artwork also, and I think is amazing in Prague too, because many of the schools you see in places are schools that these kids went to. And I have a very dear friend called Jana Marcus. I'm not sure if you know her. Her sister works in the Terezín Initiative, but she went to a school in the Holocaust. Can't pronounce it, but every time I go, I take pictures of the school, because she was, a survivor's daughters, and she went to that school, and that school's from, 1910, and you just feel, I think that they can feel their presence so much more, and the more they can identify that they're children like them, that had the same dilemmas of being a kid that they have, fights with brothers and sisters, and playing soccer, and not wanting to listen to mama, and all these other things. It becomes so much more real, and the tragedy becomes so much more incredible, that this happened to normal people. That's because they were a little bit different, or because something was wrong with them that another group of people perceived. It's very, very important.
Yeah. So time really ran out, and we are already at 8:30 p.m. in South Africa and Israel. So it is my immense pleasure to say thank you to you, Zuzana and Liz, for really opening a door to looking at art, to reflecting on the power of art and of drawings. And of course, the exhibition is at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center until about mid-April. And we should definitely invite you to come and see it and interact with it and learn more. And as those that visited the Holocaust and Genocide Center in Johannesburg know, we have a lot of the drawings, poetry, and stories from Theresienstadt, Terezin, including Helga's drawings, copies, of course, of Helga's drawing, and many poems as well. And it will be our pleasure to welcome you. And Mary, I'm giving the floor back to
Thank you. Thank you. And to say thank you so much to Zuzana and Liz for a wonderful presentation, just opening our minds. It was particularly personal for me, and I don't usually make personal remarks, but the focus on the elderly. My great-grandmother was deported to Terezín from Hamburg in 15th of July, 1942. And died there in December. And to have the focus on the life of the elderly there was something very meaningful. So thank you very much from myself personally and on behalf of all of us. Also to say that the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center is hosting an excellent webinar next Tuesday evening, and we will send you the invitation. Please look out for our invitations and join us as you always do. Thank you, Liz and Zuzana, for a very meaningful evening as always, and stay safe and let's pray for peace.
Oh, yes. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, and thank you.
Bye, Bob. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.